I never expected to hear my own wife talk about me like that. We were out with her friends for a casual dinner, something she had planned weeks ago. I hadn't even wanted to go. These nights were always the same. Her gossiping with her friends while I sat there, nodding along, barely included in the conversation. But this time was different. The restaurant was packed, and we ended up at a long table where I was seated a few spots away from her. I was just far enough that she probably thought I couldn't hear her. At first, I wasn't even paying attention. My mind was elsewhere, probably thinking about work or our weekend plans. Then, through the usual chatter, I heard one of her friends ask, "So, how's married life treating you?" Her response? A laugh. A loud, dismissive laugh, followed by words I'll never forget. "Oh, please. He's just my roommate at this point. Just my roommate." I don't even remember how the conversation continued after that, because my mind went blank. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. She wasn't joking. She wasn't being playful, teasing, or affectionate. She sounded serious. Indifferent, as if she had already accepted this version of our relationship as fact. Worse, her friends chuckled and nodded, like they had heard her say it before. I sat there, feeling those words settle in my stomach like a rock. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't even sad. I was just stunned. Is that how she really saw me? Just a roommate? I started replaying the last few months, maybe even the last year, trying to figure out when things had changed. When had I stopped being her husband and become just someone who occupied the same space? Had I been blind to it all this time? I wasn't perfect. No one is. But I had never once thought of her as anything less than my wife. I worked hard. I supported her. I made an effort. And yet, here she was, reducing me to some guy who just happened to live with her. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I didn't say much. I didn't react. I didn't confront her right then and there. What was I supposed to do? 'Cause a scene in the middle of the restaurant? Ask her to explain herself while her friends watched? No. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had struck a nerve. But inside, something shifted. For the rest of the night, I saw her differently. The way she barely acknowledged me. The way she was fully engaged in conversations with everyone except me. The way she laughed and joked with her friends while I sat there, unnoticed. And suddenly I saw it clearly. I was already living as her roommate. I just hadn't realized it yet. When we got home, I didn't say a word. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't demand an explanation. I was still processing it, still deciding how I felt. But one thing was certain. Something had changed. I wasn't sure what I was going to do about it yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be just a roommate anymore. The silence between us felt heavier than usual that night. She went about her routine, kicking off her shoes, grabbing a glass of water, scrolling through her phone, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just embarrassed me in front of her friends. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she would bring it up. She didn't, and that told me everything I needed to know. Maybe she'd realize what she had said. Maybe she'd hear how it sounded. But nothing, not a single glance in my direction, not a single acknowledgement of what had just happened. That was when I knew I had to say something. "Why did you say that?" She barely looked up. "Say what?" "At dinner, when they asked about married life." She frowned slightly, still distracted by whatever was on her screen. "What are you talking about?" "You called me your roommate." That got her attention. She looked up, rolling her eyes like I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Oh, that? Come on, it was just a joke." "A joke?" I let out a small, humorless laugh. "You didn't sound like you were joking." She sighed and set her phone down, finally giving me her full attention. "You're being too sensitive. It was just something to say. I didn't mean anything by it." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to tell myself I was overreacting, that it was just an offhand remark, not a glimpse into how she really saw me. But I couldn't, because deep down I knew better. "You didn't mean anything by it?" I repeated, shaking my head. "So, if I said the same thing about you? If I told my friends you were just my roommate, you wouldn't care?" She scoffed. "I wouldn't, because I wouldn't take it so seriously." I studied her, searching for any sign of regret, any sign that she understood why this wasn't okay. But there was nothing, just irritation, like I was the one making this a problem. You've said that before, haven't you? I asked. She didn't answer right away. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. My chest tightened as the realization fully hit me. This wasn't just something she blurted out in the moment. This was something she had told them before. Something she actually believed. It wasn't about the words themselves. It was about what they represented. She had already checked out of this marriage. Maybe she had for a long time. Maybe I had been holding on to something that was already gone. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just tired. I don't think you see me as your husband anymore, I said, more to myself than to her. She sighed again, rubbing her temples like I was exhausting her. Can we not do this right now? That was it. That was all she had to say. No apology. No attempt to explain. Just a plea to drop it. I nodded slowly. Fine, I said, my voice quiet. I turned and walked away, heading to our bedroom. But something inside me told me that this conversation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The woman sleeping beside me, if you could even call it that, since she had been turned away from me all night, her back a physical barrier between us, had no respect for me. Maybe she hadn't for a long time. And if that was the case, then what was I still doing here? The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. I showered, got dressed, and walked into the kitchen like I always did. She was already there, making coffee, scrolling through her phone. She glanced at me briefly, before turning back to the screen. Nothing was different for her. For her, last night's conversation had already been buried under a dozen other thoughts. She didn't see the weight of what had happened. She didn't care that I had spent the night lying awake, realizing that I was wasting my time. And that was when I knew I was done. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't sit her down for a dramatic conversation about how I deserved better, how I needed someone who actually valued me. What would be the point? She had already shown me exactly how she felt. And now, finally, I believe her that I knew what I meant to her. There was no speech that could change that. So, I started making a plan. I checked our lease. Her name was the only one on it. The bills? All under her name, too. Everything about this place, this life we had built together, was technically hers. That made things easier. I didn't have to fight for anything. I had some savings, enough to get a place of my own. I could afford to move out without any problems. The only thing left to decide was when, for the next few days, I played along. I went to work, came home, acted like everything was fine. But in reality, I was already pulling away. I started packing little by little, taking only what was mine: clothes, electronics, important documents. Everything else? She could keep it. She didn't notice. She didn't ask why I was suddenly clearing out my side of the closet, why some of my things were disappearing. She didn't pay enough attention to me for that. And that only confirmed that I was making the right decision. The night before I left, I sat in the living room, looking around one last time. This place had been ours once, a home we had built together. But now, it was just a space where two people happened to exist under the same roof. And I wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. By the next evening, I was gone. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a message. I just left. Leaving was easier than I expected. I walked out with nothing but a couple of suitcases, my laptop, and the essentials. No dramatic goodbye. No final confrontation. I simply closed the door behind me and left her to deal with the mess she had created. That first night away felt strange, but not in the way I thought it would. There was no sadness, no regret, just an odd sense of quiet. I had booked a short-term rental while I figured out my next steps. And as I sat in that unfamiliar space, I realized something. This was the first time in years that I truly felt at peace. But while I was adjusting to my newfound freedom, she was still in the dark. I expected her to notice my absence immediately, to send a flurry of texts, to blow up my phone with calls. But the first night, nothing. The next morning, still nothing. I checked my phone a few times out of curiosity. No missed calls. No messages. At first, I thought maybe she hadn't come home yet. Maybe she had stayed out late or crashed at a friend's place. But as the hours stretched on, a different thought crept in. Had she even noticed I was gone? That question answered itself late in the evening, when her name finally popped up on my screen. Where are you? Now you okay? Not what happened. Not even why did you leave? Just 3 words. No emotion. No urgency. I didn't respond. I wanted to see what she'd do next. If she'd follow up with a real attempt to talk, or if she'd just brush it off. She didn't call. She didn't follow up. And that told me everything I needed to know. But while she could pretend nothing had changed, reality was about to hit her hard. Rent was due soon. Utilities too. And this time, she wouldn't have my paycheck helping to cover them. I had checked the numbers before I left. I knew what she made. I knew what our expenses were. She could afford the place if she cut back significantly, but it wouldn't be easy. And it didn't take long for the cracks to show. A week after I left, I got another message. This time, the tone was different. Did you cancel the auto pay for the bills? I didn't answer. 2 days later, another one. I need to talk to you. Call me. She wasn't asking where I was anymore. She wasn't pretending it didn't matter. Reality was sinking in. She was alone now. She had laughed with her friends about me being just a roommate. Now she was experiencing what that actually meant. No one to split the costs. No one to help keep things running. No one there at all. And I had no intention of coming back. The messages kept coming. At first, they were spaced out, cautious, like she was testing the waters to see if I'd respond. But when she realized I wasn't playing along, the tone shifted. She started calling. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in whatever excuse she had prepared, and I certainly wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice. Then, one evening, she sent a message longer than the rest. Look, I know things got weird, but we need to talk. I feel like this has gone too far, and I don't understand why you're doing this. Can we meet? Why I was doing this. That was the part that got me. She really didn't get it. She had humiliated me in front of her friends, dismissed my feelings when I confronted her, treated me like an afterthought in our own home. But now, because things had become inconvenient for her, she suddenly wanted to talk. I ignored it. The next day, another message. I don't want things to end like this. Can we at least have a conversation? Now it was about us. Now, suddenly, she didn't want things to end. I wasn't stupid. I knew what was happening. She wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She wasn't reaching out because she suddenly realized she had made a mistake. She was reaching out because she didn't like dealing with the consequences. Still, part of me was curious. I wanted to see just how far she'd go. So I agreed to meet, not at the apartment, not anywhere private. I picked a coffee shop, neutral ground, somewhere public, where there was no chance of her turning this into some emotional spectacle. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked different. Not sad, not remorseful, just uneasy. The moment she saw me, she forced a smile. Hey! I nodded and sat across from her, waiting. She hesitated before speaking, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed to hold on to something. I don't really know how to start this. I said nothing. She sighed. I feel like you overreacted. I didn't mean what I said the way you took it, she said, her voice softer now. I think if we just talk this out, we can figure things out. I let her words hang between us for a moment before finally responding. You think I left because of one thing you said? She blinked, as if the thought had never crossed her mind. I leaned forward slightly. That wasn't a joke. That was how you really saw me. And that night, I realized I was done being in a marriage where I was nothing more than a roommate to my own wife. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She knew I was right. Still, she tried again. I didn't mean it like that, she insisted. I was just venting. My friends and I, we joke around like that all the time. I shook my head. Jokes have some truth in them. She didn't have a response to that. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. So that's it? I nodded. That's it. She looked down at her coffee, her expression unreadable. And for the first time, I saw it, the realization that she had pushed me too far, that there was no coming back from this. I stood up. Take care of yourself. And with that, I walked out. For the first time in years, I didn't have to wonder where I stood in my own relationship. I didn't have to question whether I was being taken for granted or if I was wasting my energy trying to be someone who mattered to her. I had my answer, and now I had my freedom. She tried reaching out a couple more times over the next few weeks. Nothing dramatic, just short, half-hearted attempts to reopen the conversation. Hey, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you want to talk. I didn't answer. She wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was reaching out because she missed what I did for her. The convenience, the financial stability, the comfort of having someone else around. But love, respect, those had never been part of the equation for her. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had to downsize a couple of months after I left. She couldn't afford the rent on her own. She had to give up the apartment, the place that had once been ours, but had really just been hers all along. I won't lie. A part of me found some satisfaction in that. Not because I wanted her to struggle, but because she finally had to face reality. She had treated me like I was disposable, and then she had to live with what it actually meant to be alone. As for me, I moved on. I found a new place, a smaller apartment that was mine in every sense of the word. No shared space. No one treating me like I was just a piece of furniture. It was quiet, peaceful, and every morning when I woke up, I didn't feel resentment or frustration or that dull, sinking feeling that had become so normal in my marriage. I felt good. People like to talk about closure like it's some grand emotional moment, like there's supposed to be an apology, a final conversation that wraps everything up in a neat little bow. But sometimes closure isn't about them. It's about you. Realizing that you don't need their apology. You don't need their validation. You just need to walk away. And that's exactly what I did.